Hello educators, in this Loom video we're going to take a look at if you're working on Google Slides and trying to create custom content, whether it's math or some other subject, some quick tips and tricks that can help you in making your own content through Google Slides. So this list here kind of gives you the 6 basic skills we'll be going through, and it'll range anything from as simple as how to change a background in the beginning, working up towards how do we actually create custom graphs with the numbers and the variable quantities that we want on them. So first things first, we're going to take a look at changing background, and for all of this we're kind of going to run this tutorial by taking the slide which I had shared before, and we're going to go ahead and kind of show how we built or customized that out. So the first thing might be is you're getting started on a new blank slide, so we're going to try to duplicate or at least create some of the aspects from this slide into a new blank one. One of the first things you might want to do is just decide what background color, because white as a background color is kind of boring, but also the different colors have a benefit that, for example, if I take a look here, when we're working in class, you might have all these purple slides be one piece of class, like our intro as we're talking about stuff, and then you might use different colored slides, like jumping into a green slide for one activity in class. And then when we finish with this breakout team problem and move towards Pear Deck, we might use a different color to let kids kind of know, oh, we're changing the activity, or this is now something a little unrelated potentially to the previous slide. And so to set background colors on your slides, you're just going to secondary click, and that's a right click. But you're going to do a secondary click anywhere on the slide itself or over here where you saw me do that, and there'll be this change background option. A secondary click on a computer, you'll use 2 fingers to click if you don't have a mouse with a right click. So when we say secondary or right click, you can use 2-finger clicks on your trackpad to do that. When I choose background, you'll see here in the color I can pick my background, or I can even, if you want to get fancy, you can upload images in backgrounds. They don't always work as great, but it's a good option to have. One thing I want to point out in the colors, these are solid colors that come in the first menu, which are great but kind of bland and monotone, and instead I find gradient to be a little bit more helpful. It's just more visually pleasing as it gradually changes its shade. I like this top row here where it goes from lighter to a little bit darker as it goes through, and then I could pick any color background I want. We'll go ahead and we'll pick green here since that's what we kind of had on the slide before. They do give you templates. I'm going to just delete these boxes, but you could use those and play with them. They're nothing but text boxes that are there that you could insert yourself. And I tend to just, if I want to insert a text box, just click and then start adjusting the size and the position of where I want to be putting that. So the next skill we're going to take a look at is the inserting text boxes, and I want to talk a little bit about how to use fill color and also how to change the border colors to make those text boxes pop out and be easier to read and understand for students. The first thing that helps, especially if you pick background colors, is to use fill in your text box. So I just hit insert text box right here by clicking this button, and it dropped one in. We'll show that one more time. And one of the first things I do is I like to change the fill color of my text box so it sticks out so I know where it is, because sometimes if I click away, I don't even know where that text box is anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and use this paint bucket right here, which is the fill bucket, to fill this with white. And now that makes that text box stand out a little bit better. So if this is kind of going to be our main math problem, or some of the discussion questions that you saw in that previous slide, I could now position this, so if we wanted some of the discussion questions to be on the right half of the slide, I could put that there. Now, very helpful for these boxes standing out, they'll start with no border. And up here, this menu right here is where I can play with the borders in addition to the fill color. And I'm going to go ahead and choose border weight right here to make it a little thicker. Right now it's on 0. As soon as I picked 1 point, it would be there. I don't really like 0 point, it's too thin. I tend to go with 4 point or 2 point. That causes that border to jump out a little bit better. And then I also tend to try to use different colors on those borders that can help me say, hey, students, take a look at the blue box on the right. And then similarly, I might have some kind of different color box on the other side. You see it saves the color from my old text box, but I could switch that to red or something. And now this would make it a bit easier to reference for students. Look at the red box or look at the blue box. And of course, within these, you can adjust the size of the text. You can adjust the position. You can move towards center alignment. All the alignment stuff sits right here. So if I'm telling my students, and I know I'm not saying hi, but if I want that in the middle, I could go ahead and use this right here. There are keyboard shortcuts for everything, but if I click on this here, this is one way that I could use center alignment and right alignment. And then also you see kind of vertical alignment if I want that sitting in the middle of the box versus if I want that just at the top and flowing down naturally. So I think that about covers it for text boxes. And the next thing we're going to talk about is what if I want to insert tables. So now we'll go ahead and take a look, maybe especially for math, but for all kinds of other things, it's helpful to drop tables into your slides. And for Google Slides, you're just going to go Insert right up here on this menu, and then you can drop a table into there. You see here for the table menu that you get to kind of choose, and I think there's a shortcut somewhere on this menu here, but I always go Insert Table, and then you can choose kind of the size. I'm doing a math table. I want kind of 2 columns and a few rows there, and it's ugly at first. You see it just drops with wide columns and very narrow rows. And then I can use, as you see my mouse here, if it's on the corner of the grid box or the corner of that table, now as I drag around, it will change the size of the table. It will make them more narrow, and if I wanted to make them taller or wider, some of that's available too if I go with the secondary menu. We'll get there. I'm going to fill this table right now because as you see it's a bit hard to read. I'm going to actually go ahead and just like I did the text box, I'm going to fill the table so that these pop out a little bit better. I'm also going to go ahead as I'm adjusting, I'm going to change what color is on the borders. Maybe we want a blue table here with borders, and I'm going to change the border size. Now a lot of times for a table, as you see here, you might want that header column. Sorry, that's really a header row, I guess. But this header you want to maybe pop out a little more with fill. So I'm going to go ahead and fill just these first 2 rows by selecting them, using the paint bucket, and picking a color within that same main dark or light mid blue I was using, picking one of these gradients here to kind of build some natural flow. And now we could go ahead and call that whatever we wanted. We could call that X and we could call that Y, and then we could even ultimately describe what those variables are. It might be something like dollars, or in this case it was number of shoes, but you get the idea. We might say number of sneakers or number of shoes, and X might be our number of years. Now, as I work through those tables, a couple other things that might be somewhat helpful. First off is going to be this idea of highlighting for student fill-ins. So you can see here that for our students, when they had this pre-made table, we had picked out some X values, but we wanted to make it clear for our students where their work was supposed to go or where their pop-ups were supposed to go. You can see it both here in the text-based questions, where it's highlighted in blue, and also here, and we tend to tell our students, anything with a blue highlight in the background is what we're looking for you to be doing. So if I were to go ahead and work with this, maybe I call that 0, and I want this to be a student fill-in. I want this to pop out a little more than just simple black text. So I'm going to switch that question mark over to a blue text, and more importantly, I'm going to use this highlighting pen to put a light blue in the background there. I'm also going to bump up the size a little bit to make this jump out for my students. And now that makes it a little clearer or easier for our students to see, hey, this is one of the spots that I need to be filling in, even as my table was filled out for other pieces for my teacher or somebody else perhaps. As you see, I'm just using center alignment here. One thing to point out about tables, they don't naturally do a vertical center alignment. And there's 2 ways to get there. Again, I can highlight all of this. And right up here, same thing. If I hit this middle button, now everything will center in the table in the center of each row, which is nice. You can also get there into a lot of features from your tables. If you're selecting the table and you do a secondary click, you'll see format options that really let you jump in and do a whole bunch of stuff around the size for tables and stuff, which if you want to get more customized, that could be helpful. The last thing I want to show you, sometimes you're playing around with this and one column is a whole lot bigger than the other, and you're like, I just wish these were even, and you don't want to sit here and try to play and get them to nice and even. There's a nice feature that lets you evenly distribute any columns you select. So if I select both of these columns here and I do secondary click, bear with me, my computer's getting a little laggy. When I do that secondary click, there's this option to distribute columns, which kind of evenly places this. And then also maybe I have one row and I want them all to be the same size. So I'm going to show you just with row 2 and row 3. If I wanted those to be the same size, distribute rows, and now that's there. So we're going to go take a look now at the next skill. And that next skill is going to be how do we insert graphs. Now, as you see for this graph here, it's customized. We actually talked about one of our students who's an awesome basketball player for us, my Prince, and the graph was actually about his collection of Jordan sneakers. So when we're working with or building our own graphs, this is a little bit more challenging. You are going to want templates, and I'm happy to share these templates. If you send me an email, I'm happy to share any of the graph templates I have. But using Google Drawings, we've been able to build these templates that let us easily kind of create new graphs for any real world problem or change the numbers around. This drawing right here is one example. It's the drawing I use whenever I kind of want quadrant 1 stuff and I want to make it a real world problem. Happy again to share some of these with you. It took a little bit, but basically we were inserting tables and then playing with the border size to get a nice evenly built out table. And in here there are little text boxes at each one of them. For example, you see me highlighting this here, so I could change this to say my Prince's sneakers, like that problem was about, and I could change that color over to something that kind of fits with that whole problem. And then separately in this template, we built this graph out so we could change things. For example, in that problem with my Prince, we saw that it jumps, we labeled everything, and it was just going by intervals of 1, even though we only labeled every other actual interval on the y-axis. So this would allow me to easily switch over from something like dollars over to, in this problem, maybe we were saying, okay, that's going to represent 2. This is going to be when my Prince has 4 sneakers, and would also be able to change the header over here, or I guess the column title for the y-axis. And we could change that to number of sneakers or whatever we're trying to talk about for that math problem. I don't want to go and edit all these numbers, but you see there how we kind of change that. And similarly, as we now build our graph, we actually can insert and play with different points, whether they're dots or squares or stars, and we can actually insert lines on there. So I'm going to go ahead and actually go from scratch and drop in a couple pieces here. First thing I'm going to do is show us if we want to make a straight line on a graph instead of just one data point. That's right here for select line. I click on this, and now I'm going to go ahead and just click once, and they'll just drop this line on here. You see the 2 blue dots at the end of this line, the beginning and the end, allow me to position the start and the end. So maybe we wanted to say for that problem, I think it was that my Prince started off with 4 sneakers, so I could go ahead and drag this towards the 4. And then I'm also going to need to drag this line somewhere else. Trying to remember what it was. All right, so it was just a slope of 1 once we break it down. Now what you're going to find is sometimes it's hard to exactly drag this line where I want. I want to get this clearly pierced through each box so my students are seeing it and reading it clearly. And before I do that, I'm going to make the line a bit bigger first so it's easier to read. I'm going to switch it up to 4 point, and I'm also going to switch the color to that light blue color that we had seen before. And now in here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to zoom in. The way I'm zooming in, you could go ahead and click View, click Zoom, and use the Zoom In button. But I use Command, Option, and then each time I just start hitting plus plus, it starts zooming in. So same way I could hit View, Zoom, and zoom myself in. This is different. If I try to just zoom in with the regular Control plus or Command plus, it's not going to zoom in properly when I'm in drawings. So instead I need to use this, or the shortcut is hold Command and Option at the same time, and now you'll zoom in on the drawing, even though your whole screen is not zooming in. And when I do that, as I zoom in more and more, it allows me to get really exact if I want to be precise and make sure that these points are going exactly through the lines that I want them to be going through. So now I could line this up a little bit better with that corner, and when I zoom back out, now we can see, all right, this is hitting exactly the points that I wanted on my graph. Up here is how I changed the start of the line and the end. I don't like anything for the line start. You could make it a dot, but to me it gets hard to place that dot in the right spot. See, it's not right on the y-axis anymore. I'll show you a better solution for that. But helpful is to be able to sew this line to make it keep going. So if I go here, you can see now I've been able to show our students that this line continues. My Prince is going to keep gathering more sneakers each year. All right, now the last thing I kind of want to show us when we're within the graphs is we want to be able to point out specific points. And you see I have in my template here some stars or squares or different points I could use. So to drop those in here, if I click this circle square button, I can go into shapes. And if I click circle, I just like to click once. It drops this circle in here. Now it might be too big, and I could do a couple things. I could use this arrow right here to shrink the size of it, or I could go into the format. And if I want this circle to be perfectly circular, now you can see, oh, this format could let me pick, for example, maybe I want 4/10 of an inch for width and height, and now that makes a nice, beautiful, perfectly round circle instead of me dragging and trying to get it that way. but they both work for changing the size of these shapes on the graph. And the other options you could drop in, there are in shapes, you've got circles, I use this for the square, which I find pretty helpful when we make that smaller. And then ultimately also, we found stars are pretty helpful. And the reason we use different shapes is so we could point different things out to our students. So here you see ultimately, oh, that's not on that problem. I think I put it in here. Yeah. There's a circle and a square and a star and even a smiley face up there on the graph. And this makes it easier for us to talk to students. We say start at the square, how do you move towards the star? And just by using different things other than a dot, it makes it easier to reference points on our graph. You can definitely also use different colors on the graph. We like to keep things consistent, so that was a blue type graph there and we use blue stuff. But also I could just, for example, if I use two squares, I could call one of them the red square and drop that on the graph, and I could call another one maybe the green square. And that's another way I can use colors to make it easier to reference points, especially as we're in this online world and it's tough to help kids follow along on a computer. So that gets us through the graph, both how we actually use a Google Drawing template and also how we can insert some lines and points onto that graph. Once you like what you have here, for example, if this was the picture, it's not done yet, but if this is what I wanted to drop into my slide, I could take a screenshot. I would Google search that. There's a keyboard shortcut that's easy to get there. And when I take that screenshot of just a position now, I'm able to paste that screenshot in here. Again, I could play with border sizes, things like that, to give this graph a nice border if I wanted, like you see there, and to change its color. And then I could change the size and position. All right. Pretty much there. One couple last things we want to talk about, less important, but they could be helpful, is this idea of transparent images. And I should have added, and I'm going to add in here, layering, so we know if we're layering which things are on the top layer and bottom. That's very helpful to know. And then also we'll talk about the agenda bar. Okay, for transparent images or .png files, what you're going to do basically is a PNG file, or if I search for this, maybe I search Jordan sneakers transparent, is a file that is just a little bit, rather than a JPEG image or other images, it's not going to actually cover other stuff up other than its image. So this sneaker right here is actually, rather than a regular JPEG, an example of a PNG. And you see one of the nice things about it is that the sneaker itself will take stuff up, but all the rest of the box is actually just invisible, and you can drop it in there. So this is nice if you want to drop little pictures to make things more relatable for students. A .png file, and you can search for transparent images, or you can search for .png. That's really the extension for transparent images. And that can help you drop that in. And one thing that's important to notice is layering. This sneaker, this PNG image, is the top file right now. So it covers things up. If I wanted the graph to be the top file, I could secondary click on it, go find order right here, and I could either bring forward, moves it up one spot, or if I bring to front, now you see this is actually going to be covering the sneaker up. So layers can become important. Each time I paste a new document or image into the document, it becomes the top layer. But if I didn't want it to be the top layer, I can just kind of play around using which layer is there by order. This video has gone way too long, of course. The last thing I want to talk about quickly is the creating a custom agenda bar. And that's what you see at the bottom here. And all I've done to do this is we go through our lesson each day. This agenda bar just kind of lets kids know where we're at. So if we were right here on the day 15 agenda, we were on breakout teams, and when we get to the next slide, it just bumps over, tells kids, okay, we're on to Kahoot. And then this can be customized each day. All we did to create that, the way we got it, was we went ahead and we inserted a table to begin with. And that table was just kind of a 1x4 table. And then we went ahead and we played with the size and the position. So we brought that table down towards the bottom, stretched the size out, and then just did some things like put some fill into that table. So we'll go ahead and fill with that color that we had seen there, that light reddish. Added some borders to it, where we changed the size of the border and the color so that sticks out a little bit better. And then we could also start adding our text in and changing the size of each column. So the agenda one was a little bit smaller, so now we could say, oh, whatever day it is, maybe this is day one agenda. And then we could start customizing things out And so then you just copy, all we really do is copy and duplicate this and then just play with the color shading. So if we were on this first piece here, if it was breakout rooms and that was the first part, we would just change the fill there in that cell itself from red to yellow to say, hey, this is the current slide. And then as we go, we just kind of use gray fill to say, hey, that's something we finished, yellow is where we're at, red is still to come. This video is way too long at 20 minutes. If you watched through it, if you found it helpful and have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me and send me a quick email on that. My email address, I'll just go ahead and put here right on the slide. My email address is ddoherty3, and that's at bostonpublicschools.org. If I'm missing things, if there's other cool stuff that I should definitely be seeing, please, I would love to learn about that. Definitely send me an email for that as well.